You hold them without any awareness. Luminous links, worn from age, thought of as gold. Not chains, you think. No, these are your choices, your dreams, your awards. But if you listen in the silence, if you run your hand along the shine, you will feel it, a density that doesn't belong to you. The jewelry was passed down like an inheritance. The chains were clasped with ballads of freedom, and you, glowing in your captivity, call it fate. But somewhere, beneath the shine, a petite voice remembers freedom never needed a lock to shine. It begins without warning. A whisper so faint you mistake it for your own thought. It brushes the edge of your mind, leaves no scar, no memory of intrusion. Only a subtle ripple, a small shift, a thought that feels, somehow, earned. At first it is easy to ignore. The first repetition is a novelty, the second an odd echo, the third a quiet presence settling in the background. By the 10th time it is familiar. By the 50th it is inevitable. We do not question what returns to us dressed in familiarity. The mind, weary from discerning signal from noise, chooses ease over doubt. It mistakes repetition for truth, resonance for reality, memory for fact. And so the whisper, having made its home within you, begins to hum through your decisions, your reflections, your dreams. It is no longer an external voice. It wears your tone now. It speaks with your pauses and cadences. You believe it because it feels like it came from you, but it did not. The mind, designed not for precision, but for survival, was built to trust the repeated. In the forests of our ancestors, the repeated rustle was not coincidence but warning. In the cold of prehistory, the familiar fire meant life, and the unfamiliar shadow meant death. Repetition became safety. And in the modern corridors of information, this ancient reflex betrays us, not by shouting lies, but by murmuring them until they feel natural. The chains slip on easily when they glitter like jewelry. You adorn yourself with them proudly, an identity shaped by slogans, beliefs carried like heirlooms, choices offered like gifts but forged from someone else's need. You do not feel bound. You feel complete. The paradox of illusion is not that it imprisons against your will. It offers you keys that lock the doors tighter. It teaches you to love the weight on your wrists, to polish it until it shines, to call it freedom, because the absence of chains would feel like nakedness. Freedom is not the absence of guidance. It is the awareness of influence. It is the slow unthreading of the ideas that fit too perfectly, the questions you forgot to ask because the answers arrived too soon. Somewhere beyond the jewelry, beyond the scripted dreams and rehearsed rebellions, there is a quieter place, a place where freedom is not worn but felt, a freedom that does not need a name, a slogan, or a mirror to prove it exists. But it is not loud. It will not chase you. It waits for the moment when the familiar no longer comforts you, when the repeated phrase sours on your tongue, when the gleam of the chain catches the wrong kind of light. Then, if you dare, you may begin, not by breaking free, but by seeing clearly. And in that seeing, the whisper finally loses its hold. And the chains, for the first time, reveal themselves for what they always were. You run your fingers along the links and marvel at how well they fit you. The chains were never forced upon you. You chose them, each link offered gently, dressed as a promise, a better life, a clearer identity, a louder voice, a safer path. Small decisions, each insignificant when held alone, but together they wove themselves into a shining pattern so intricate you forgot it was heavy. Choice became a performance, desire became an inheritance, and belief became a reflex. We are not trapped because someone locked the door. We are trapped because we learned to build the door ourselves, and then we learned to prefer staying inside it. Safety wrapped itself around our ankles and called it destiny. Ambition whispered through the keyhole and called it freedom. Somewhere, buried beneath the carefully repeated phrases, lies the forgotten memory of your first knowing. The moment before language touched you, before identity solidified around you like wet cement. It is distant now, faint like the ghost of a star swallowed by a morning sky, but it is there. It waits in the space between distractions, between choices that feel urgent but are hollow, between the reassuring echo of your own voice rehearsing a script you did not write. You were not born wearing chains. You were not born mistaking them for ornaments. You learned. And what is learned can be unlearned. What is adorned can be unfastened. But not through rage, not through destruction, not through rebellion that follows yet another familiar pattern. The true unmaking begins in stillness, in the pause between compulsions, in the uncomfortable silence where no external cue tells you who you are supposed to be. At first, the silence will terrify you. Without the weight of the chains, you will feel formless, vulnerable, undefined. You will crave the return of the familiar voices, the old comforts, the bracelets of belief polished by 1,000 hands before yours. But stay in the silence. Let the panic rise and pass. Let the disorientation melt like mist under a new sun. Because after the silence, after the longing for old illusions fades, something new emerges, something quieter than any voice you have heard. A knowing not spoken, but lived. A freedom not purchased, but reclaimed. A self not assembled, but remembered. And the chains, gleaming in a pile at your feet, will no longer call to you. They will look for the first time exactly as they are, beautiful, carefully made, and utterly unnecessary. You stand at the crossroads, staring down 1,000 possible paths. Each direction promises a different future, a different self, a different version of freedom. The signs are bright and many-colored, the choices endless, a labyrinth of glittering possibilities laid at your feet like a crown you only need to reach out and claim. And yet something hollows in your chest, a quiet unease, a dissonance you cannot name. You were taught that choice is freedom, that the more you can choose, the freer you become. But the paths you see are not paths you made. They are corridors built long before you arrived, painted to look different, but bending always toward the same familiar center. They shimmer with the illusion of autonomy, but beneath the surface they converge, silent tributaries flowing into the same unseen ocean. What you are offered is not creation, it is selection, and selection is not the same as freedom. You choose between products, between parties, between slogans, between lives scripted so precisely you feel rebellious simply for picking the least popular flavor. But the rebellion was part of the menu. The dissent was already anticipated. The house wins because the house wrote the choices. This is the mirage. You walk through it with your hands open, thinking you are grasping liberty, but what you hold are echoes, prefabricated dreams, pre-chewed meanings, offered to you not as gifts but as agreements. Accept these options and you may call yourself free. You are not free because you can choose between the cages. You are free when you realize you can step outside the structure altogether. When you understand that true freedom is not between one chain and another, but beyond the very idea that your worth must be proven through choosing. But stepping outside is terrifying. The mind, conditioned to seek paths already marked, fears the open field. No directions, no signs, no guarantees of applause for picking the right way. Real freedom is not glamorous. It is naked. It is uncertain. It demands not just courage, but the willingness to exist without validation. And so most stay, choosing between the familiar options, celebrating their victories as if they had written the game, wearing their badges of choice like armor against the hollow truth pressing at the edges of their dreams. Few walk into the wilderness where no paths are laid. Fewer still stay there long enough to remember. Choice is not freedom. It is a shadow of it, a reflection in water stirred by unseen winds. True freedom begins when the game itself is questioned, when you no longer mistake movement for escape, when you feel the hollow ache of all the paths leading back to the same place, and you dare to sit down instead of walking, not choosing, not running, simply seeing. And in that seeing, the mirage dissolves, like mist under an unseen sun, and what remains is not a path. It is the endless, terrifying, beautiful open, and the first real step you have ever taken. You were told that every decision was yours, that every fork you faced was a testament to your sovereignty, but no one spoke of the invisible hands arranging the choices before you. No one mentioned the paths you never saw, because they were paved over long before you arrived. Freedom was packaged in bright colors and slogans and sold back to you, and you bought it gladly, because to refuse would have meant standing alone, in silence, in uncertainty. And who among us is trained for that? The mind clings to choice because choice feels like control. Even when the options are hollow, even when they lead to the same destination, we find comfort in the act of selecting. We become loyal to the labels we pick. We invest meaning into the choices given, even when they were constructed to bind us gently to an unseen wheel. Pick a side, pick a role, pick a purpose, but do not ask where the stage came from, or why the script feels so familiar, or who profits from your performance. Choice was never about liberation. It was about participation, about ensuring that you believed the system was something you entered willingly. You were never meant to build your own sky. You were meant to pick a star from the ones already burning. And yet, somewhere, beneath the heavy tapestry of choices offered and choices accepted, a quieter knowing persists. A memory not of rebellion, but of origin, of a time before you needed to decide what kind of person you would be, of a time when existence was enough. This memory stirs when you pause before 1,000 glittering doors and realize none of them lead where you wish to go. It hums when you feel the strange grief of selecting an identity from a menu, knowing the menu itself was not made for you. It calls to you not in anger, but in a strange, aching hope. You are more than what you choose between. You are what remains when the choosing stops. The mirage of choice survives because we are afraid to stop moving, afraid that without a decision we will vanish, afraid that if we do not pick a door, we will cease to matter. But it is the movement that exhausts us. It is the endless selecting that blinds us. It is the stillness, the refusal, the sacred pause that begins to open a different kind of freedom. Not the freedom to pick a crown, the freedom to leave the kingdom entirely. You are not what you consume. You are not what you align with. You are not what you choose under the pretense of autonomy. You are the breath between choices, the awareness before the offering, the field stretching beyond the last marked road. And if you can bear the discomfort of not knowing, if you can stand still while the world demands your loyalty, if you can resist the polished urge to define yourself too quickly, you may feel it soft and astonishing. Freedom is not something you reach, it is something you remember. It was never lost, only buried, only waiting, only one breath, one refusal, one unbecoming away. Long before you spoke your first word, the words were already waiting for you, laid out like invisible threads, looping through the air you breathed, the glances you absorbed, the silences you did not know how to name. Before memory sharpened into story, the scripts began, soft hands pressing meaning into you without permission, soft voices carving paths through your unformed sky. You were not given facts, you were given frameworks, not reasons but rhythms, not truths but tunes you would hum long after you forgot where the music began. You learned without knowing. You were learning. You learned who you were supposed to be from the smiles withheld and the punishments delivered. You learned which parts of yourself to celebrate and which to suffocate. You learned that love could be conditional, that approval was currency, that worth could be negotiated in careful gestures and unspoken rules. These lessons were not always cruel. They were often offered by people who loved you, people repeating the same scripts handed to them long before they knew how to question, people trapped inside the same invisible walls, teaching you to decorate your own cage with gratitude. You learned, perhaps, that to be good was to be small, that to be safe was to be silent, that to be loved was to be useful, that to be seen was to perform. And you learned, without anyone needing to say it outright, that certain dreams were too large for hands like yours, that certain kinds of joy were reserved for other people, that certain kinds of questions were dangerous to ask. The scripts were not taught in classrooms. They were taught in doorways, in dinners, in disappointed sighs. They were repeated in the spaces between what was said and what was meant. And you memorized them with a diligence only a child can possess, the desperate diligence of someone who knows, without knowing how they know, that survival depends on it. You wore the scripts like second skin. You learned to anticipate the next line before it was spoken. You learned to shape your laughter, your anger, your hunger, your wonder into the spaces the script allowed. You learned to edit yourself before the world had to. And in time, you forgot there was anything outside the script. You began to think the words were yours. You began to think the story was inevitable. You began to think the walls were the world. But somewhere, small and patient, a part of you kept noticing. A flicker of dissonance. A pang of longing that did not fit neatly into any line you had been taught. a wild note vibrating beneath the orchestrated hum of expectation. That note is still there. It does not shout. It does not rebel in fireworks and broken windows. It waits, humming quietly under your breath, behind your practiced smiles, beneath your familiar fears. It waits for you to wonder, who wrote this part of me? Who benefits when I stay inside this role? What was left unsaid when the script ended? The mind clings to the familiar because it feels like home, even when the familiar is a script that suffocates, even when the familiar is a repetition of a fear that never belonged to you. And yet you can step off the stage. You can set the script down. You can sit in the unbearable silence of not knowing your next line. And in that silence, you may hear something else, a voice not rehearsed, a desire not inherited, a self not sculpted for the comfort of others. You were not born to play a part. You were born to remember you were never a part to begin with. You were the whole stage, the whole sky, the space beyond the words. And now the real work begins, not in finding a better script, but in standing, trembling perhaps, in the silence where no script exists, and listening. The world applauded when you followed your lines well. The small rewards came quickly, a nod, a smile, a door that opened a little easier than it would have otherwise. The scripts taught you how to navigate praise and avoid shame, how to be small enough to be loved, yet big enough to seem brave. And over time, the applause became addictive, even as it hollowed you, even as some part of you grew quieter each time you chose approval over authenticity. It is easy to mistake survival for success, easy to confuse fitting in with belonging. But deep within the crevices of the self, behind the layers that learn to say the right thing at the right time, something older waits. Something untamed, something that remembers the sound of your voice before it was trained into coherence. It thrums softly whenever you say yes when you mean no. It aches quietly when you smile in moments you wish you could weep. It scratches at the inside of your ribs when you find yourself performing a version of a life that no longer fits, but feels safer than facing the void of not knowing who you might be without it. And the tragedy, perhaps, is not just that these scripts were handed to you, but that you learned to hand them to yourself. You learned to whisper the lines in your own ear before anyone else had a chance to correct you. You became your own prompter, your own disciplinarian, your own most relentless echo of the very structures that once bound you. Freedom, when it first brushes against you, will not feel like freedom. It will feel like disorientation. It will feel like failure. It will feel like standing on a stage with the lights glaring and no words in your mouth, no safe rhythm to follow, no map tucked under your sleeve. The mind, when deprived of its familiar scripts, will panic. It will try to rush you back into the comfort of old phrases: be good, be quiet, be useful, be small. It will tell you that to be unscripted is to be lost. It will tell you that to be lost is to be nothing. But the truth is this: being lost is the first honest thing you have felt in a long time. To step away from the script is not to fall into nothingness. It is to fall back into possibility, into a self that is not constructed by repetition, but revealed by presence, into a life that is not a performance, but a becoming. There will be moments when the old lines pull at you, sweet and familiar. There will be moments when you long to step back into the comfortable grooves, to exchange your trembling aliveness for the steady applause of the well-rehearsed. But if you can stand it, if you can stand the trembling, the silence, the bewildering terror of not knowing how the next moment will unfold, you will find something stronger than certainty. You will find your own breath again. You will find that beneath every borrowed word, every inherited fear, every memorized smile, there was always a you that could not be scripted, a you that does not need to perform to be real, a you that was waiting, patient as a stone beneath the river, untouched by the currents that tried to polish it smooth. You do not need to burn the script. You do not need to rage against it. You only need to stop speaking the lines that no longer feel like your own. And when the silence comes, that thick, unsettling, beautiful silence, trust it, because in that silence you are not disappearing. You are emerging, finally, fully, unwritten. You were told to find work that felt like play, to chase the passion that ignited your spirit and turn it into your offering to the world, to blend labor and love so seamlessly that you would never again feel the weight of obligation. Do what you love, they said, and you'll never work a day in your life. But what they did not say, what they could not say, was how easily even play can become a leash once it is measured, monetized, and demanded. How quickly the spark that once lit your chest can be captured in a glass jar, labeled, priced, and placed on a shelf for others to admire and consume. How the thing you did freely, without clock or scoreboard, can be turned inside out until it feels like a debt you must constantly repay to prove your worth. You begin with joy. You dance without music. You create without audience. You move because movement itself is a kind of worship. But soon the world comes with its measurements, its applause, its hunger. It asks for more, and then more again, until the work that once bloomed from your fingertips becomes something you manage, something you monitor, something you dread. It is no longer enough to love what you do. You must optimize it, promote it, turn it into a ladder toward visibility, toward validation, toward survival. And you find yourself working harder than ever before. Working not just with your hands, but with your soul, offering not just your hours, but your essence. And the lines between work and self blur until you cannot tell where one ends and the other begins. At first, you think this is freedom. After all, didn't you choose this? Didn't you chase your dreams while others settled for security? But freedom that must be justified every day is no freedom at all. The play becomes performance, the joy becomes metric, and somewhere along the way, the quiet child who once created for no reason at all, the one who scribbled stories in notebooks, the one who built cities from stones and songs from silence, begins to disappear behind the polished persona of doing what you love. You wear your passion like armor now. You recite your gratitude like a shield against the creeping exhaustion that whispers, "This is not what you were promised." But exhaustion does not mean you are broken. It means the world taught you to extract from yourself what should have been given freely. It means the play was never meant to be sold. It was meant to be sacred. You are not wrong to love the work. You are not wrong to build from joy. But you are not meant to be consumed by it. True play is not an endless offering to others. True play needs no witness. True play needs no metric. It exists in the moments when you forget yourself entirely, when the river of time vanishes, when you are neither succeeding nor failing, but simply being. Work that feels like play can still become a cage if it is tethered to the need for constant affirmation. If every act must prove your value, then even your joy has been drafted into the service of survival. But there is another way, a quieter way, a way that reclaims the sacredness of uselessness, of creating with no outcome, of moving with no audience, of working not for a crown, but for the sheer, holy act of making. You are allowed to guard your joy. You are allowed to let some things exist without proof. You are allowed to let your hands be messy, your voice be uncertain, your work be unfinished. You are allowed to play without turning the game into a career. You are allowed to be a creature of wonder, not a machine of output. Because in the end, it is not the polished product that will save you. It is the breathless, wordless moments of immersion when you forgot the world was watching, when you remembered you were more than what you could produce, when you belonged not to the market, not to the audience, not even to your own ambition, but to the timeless, boundless place where wonder lives, where you live still. If you remember, if you are willing, even now, to stop performing your passion long enough to feel it again. From the beginning, you were taught to measure time, not as a river to swim in, not as a song to be heard, but as a currency to be spent, earned, saved, wasted. Time became a thing you could own, a thing you could lose, a thing you could trade for something better than itself. And so you learned to divide your days into increments, to portion out your hours like offerings, to an invisible ledger that no one ever lets you see. You learned that a minute was only as valuable as what you could achieve within it, that an hour was precious only if it bore fruit, that a day without measurable proof of progress was a debt you would carry like a stone against your ribs. You were told to spend your time wisely, to invest it, to harvest it, but no one told you that time is not a possession, that it cannot be hoarded or bought or conquered. That time is the fabric you are woven from, the breath between your thoughts, the silent pulse moving through you whether you measure it or not. They sold you clocks and calendars and planners. They built entire cities around the breaking of the day into manageable slices. They whispered that the faster you moved, the more you could accumulate, the closer you would come to winning. But time does not speed up when you move faster. It does not slow down when you hold your breath. It simply is. It does not answer to you. It does not obey. The tragedy is not that time passes. The tragedy is that you were taught to fear its passing so deeply that you forgot how to live inside it. You were taught to see each moment as a transaction, to squeeze it dry for some future gain, to look always ahead to the reward promised just beyond the horizon, and in doing so, to miss the quiet miracle of the horizon itself. And what of the minutes you cannot account for? The lazy, drifting afternoons, the conversations that meandered nowhere, the dreams that began and ended without ever becoming projects. You were taught to mourn them as losses, but perhaps they were the purest hours you ever lived. Perhaps they were the only moments when you were not selling yourself back to yourself. There is a kind of wealth that cannot be measured. It lives in the spaces you do not schedule. It breathes in the pauses you do not monetize. It gathers, silent and golden, in the corners of your life that no one else can see. And you will find, if you allow yourself to fall back into the river instead of trying to bottle it. That time is not your enemy. It is not your creditor. It is not a ticking clock counting down your worth. It is the field you move through. It is the breath of the world against your skin. It is the unseen hand cradling your every becoming. And when the race ends, because it always ends, you will not wish for more hours to trade. You will wish for more hours you lived without counting, more hours you touched without fear. More hours where time was not a product but a partner. And those hours, whether many or few, whether remembered or simply felt once like the warmth of a forgotten sun, will be enough. More than enough, they already are. At first, it feels like safety, to move with the current, to hear your thoughts echoed in 1,000 voices, to know without asking that you belong. Agreement is a balm, a soft blanket over the sharp edges of uncertainty. When the world nods with you, it feels like confirmation. When the faces around you mirror your beliefs, it feels like evidence. Surely, you tell yourself, so many voices cannot be wrong. Surely the crowd knows something deeper, something truer, something safer than what you alone could know. And so you sink into the warm gravity of consensus. You abandon the questions that once kept you awake. You smooth over the doubts that once flickered in your ribs like wild moths. You choose the comfort of the familiar story over the terror of the uncharted question. Because to stand apart is to feel the cold wind of isolation. To question the consensus is to risk exile, not with swords or shackles, but with silence, with the slow turning away of eyes you once trusted, with the sudden absence of laughter that once made you feel real. And what could be more frightening than becoming invisible? Consensus is a spell, a soothing chant that erases the sharp angles of doubt. It promises you are not alone. It promises you are correct because you are many. It promises you are safe because you agree. But agreement is not truth, and belonging built on silence is not belonging at all. The mind, desperate for certainty, mistakes volume for veracity. The louder the chorus, the more tempting it is to sing along, even when the words taste like ash, even when the melody erases something tender in you that once dared to hum a different tune. And so, quietly, you amputate your questions, you bury your unrest, you nod when you want to tremble, you cheer when you want to weep, all for the comfort of standing among the many instead of walking alone into the mist. But there is a cost so subtle you may not feel it until years have passed, until the dissonance between your life and your soul grows too loud to ignore. The cost is yourself, not in one dramatic moment, but in the slow erosion of authenticity, the gradual fading of the voice that once spoke without needing approval. Consensus is a mirror hall where you see yourself reflected 1,000 times, each reflection slightly altered until you forget which one is you. But if you are quiet, if you dare to stand at the edge of the gathering and listen without needing to be heard, you will notice something. You will notice the cracks in the harmony, the small shifts of discomfort behind the loudest declarations, the tiny betrayals each person carries, hidden behind the safety of agreement. Because deep down, most know. Most feel the trembling. Most hear the faint discord between their inner knowing and their outer nodding. But it is a rare and holy thing to honor that trembling, to refuse the easy comfort of consensus, to trust the solitary voice within you even when it echoes back alone. Freedom is not found in the center of the crowd. It is found at the edges where the questions live, where the silence hums with things not yet named. It is not the agreement of the many that makes something true. It is the quiet certainty of the soul that has dared to stand unaccompanied, unconfirmed, unafraid. And there, in the open fields beyond applause, you may find not comfort, but something better, the raw, unfiltered clarity of your own becoming. You were told you must rebel, told that freedom lived in defiance, that individuality was a flame you could purchase, a style you could wear, a flag you could wave. They whispered that you could distinguish yourself not by who you were, but by what you opposed, and by how loudly. And so they built entire markets for rebellion. They designed clothes stitched with dissent. They bottled slogans and sold them in bright packages. They crafted identities pre-soaked in resistance, waiting for you to slip them on like new skin. The rebellion was already anticipated, already priced, already placed neatly between the shelves of belonging and consumption. You thought you were choosing freedom. You thought you were stepping outside the system, but they were waiting for you there, too. Smiling, holding out the badge of individuality, already mass-produced. And it is so tempting, because to be rebellious without cost, without loneliness, without the ache of true exile, feels easier, feels safer. They offered you a way to shout without silence, a way to dissent without discomfort, a way to resist without leaving the comfort of the familiar marketplace. But rebellion sold in stores is not rebellion. It is another form of allegiance, a brighter chain, a sharper echo, a mirror tilted slightly to make you believe you are standing somewhere new. True rebellion is not glamorous, it is not fashionable, it does not wrap itself in hashtags and merchandising. True rebellion is invisible at first. It is the quiet refusal to wear the scripts offered to you. It is the trembling act of listening longer than you are told to listen, of looking beyond the curated windows, of asking questions that have no clean answers. It is not about what you buy, or what you wear, or what you signal. It is about what you are willing to lose in the name of something unseen. And often what must be lost first is the very need to be seen at all. The deepest acts of freedom are not televised. They are not marketed. They do not go viral. They happen in the stillness of private choices, the decision to speak when silence would be safer, the decision to leave when staying would be easier, the decision to create without permission, without market, without applause. You will be offered many ready-made rebellions. You will be invited to belong to groups that promise you outsider status without asking you to step outside. But the ones selling rebellion are not interested in your liberation. They are interested in your loyalty, and you will know the difference when you feel it, when you realize that real freedom costs you more than you expected, when you realize that real rebellion is not something you wear, it is something you become, quietly, steadily, without guarantee, without sale. And in that becoming, you will no longer need to prove you are free. You will simply be. There is a voice in your mind that sounds like your own. It narrates your days, your doubts, your dreams. It tells you the story of who you are with such intimacy, such familiarity, that you rarely stop to wonder where it learned the script it recites. You trust it because it speaks in your tongue, because it uses your memories as evidence, your hopes as architecture, because it flatters you with the illusion that you have built yourself alone. But listen more closely. Listen beneath the polished cadence of self. You will hear echoes, old teachers, shaping the borders of what you believed possible. Old friends, laughing you towards certain ambitions and away from others. Old wounds, whispering warnings disguised as wisdom. Old fears, arranging the furniture of your mind until the only pathways left feel inevitable. The voice you call your own is an archive, a cathedral of absorbed permissions and prohibitions, a collection of borrowed maps for roads you never questioned. And so you build a life inside these echoes. You build it skillfully. You decorate it with trophies and dreams that feel authentic because they were repeated to you often enough to feel native. But the self built from echoes cannot see beyond its own walls. The self that only reflects what it has already heard can only walk in circles, tracing the same familiar stories, mistaking their repetition for proof that they are real, that they are chosen. You believe you are thinking freely, but most days you are only remembering louder. You believe you are dreaming new dreams, but most nights you are only stitching together the ruins of other people's hopes. Freedom is not achieved by building a louder echo chamber. It is achieved by learning to hear the silences between the echoes, the places where the familiar voice falters, where the well-rehearsed story cracks and light spills through. It is in those cracks that the truer self waits, the self that is not curated, the self that is not performing a loyalty to the past, the self that asks different questions, questions not rewarded by the world you know, questions that sound at first like mistakes, like betrayals, like heresies. But it is not heresy to wonder where your own mind has been. It is not betrayal to unthread the tapestry of your own belief. It is not arrogance to admit that you are not yet finished, that you are not yet fully seen, even by yourself. You are allowed to press against the walls of the echo chamber. You are allowed to mistrust even your most sacred certainties. You are allowed to become a stranger to yourself for a while, because only in the uncomfortable wilderness beyond the familiar voice can you meet the parts of you that have been waiting, silent, unclaimed, vast. You were not meant to live forever in the house built from echoes. You were meant to outgrow it. You were meant to walk beyond it into a sky too wide to echo anything at all. And there, in the aching openness where no walls remain, you will find not the end of yourself, but the beginning. You were taught to admire the hero, the one who rises, battles, sacrifices, overcomes, the one whose story arcs upward toward triumph, whose scars gleam like medals, whose name becomes legend. You were told that struggle makes you worthy, that endurance purifies, that suffering polishes the soul into something brighter than mere existence. And so you learned to seek battles where none were needed. You learned to wear hardship as proof. You learned to measure your worth by the weight you could carry, the storms you could withstand, the mountains you could drag behind you. Pain became a currency. Effort became a religion. You began to believe that unless you fought for every inch of your life, you were unworthy of living it. That ease was suspicious, that joy unearned was hollow, that to be heroic you must bleed. But struggle, though noble in stories, can become a gilded cage. The hero, once free, becomes trapped by the very myths that crowned him. You do not see the chains because they are made of praise. You do not feel the manacles because they are made of purpose. You wake each day asking what battle must be fought to justify your breathing. You deny yourself rest, believing it indulgent. You deny yourself wonder, believing it naive. You deny yourself peace, believing it lazy. You fight because you do not know who you are without the fight. And yet, there is a deeper bravery not often sung. The bravery of laying down the sword when there is no enemy. The bravery of resting without apology. The bravery of being without justification. You were not born only to struggle. You were not born only to triumph. You were not born to perform pain for the sake of meaning. There is a courage greater than endurance. There is a freedom greater than conquest. It is the courage to unfasten yourself from the need to be extraordinary, the courage to be unnamed, to be unproven, to be vast without boundary, without victory, without script. You are not required to suffer to deserve your life. You are not required to carry old mountains just because you once knew their weight. You can let go. You can unlearn the myth that love must be earned through suffering. You can step out from under the banners you once raised and find yourself not lesser, but fuller. The true hero is not the one who wins the endless war. It is the one who dares to imagine a life beyond the war. It is the one who, upon finding no more dragons to slay, dares to lay down the armor, daring still to be worthy, daring still to be whole. But the world, still addicted to the spectacle of striving, will not understand at first. It will ask why you have put down your sword. It will wonder aloud why you have grown silent, why you do not rush to chase or to climb or to conquer. It will call you lazy. It will call you lost. It will call you ungrateful for the arena it built just for you. But you will know. You will know that leaving the battlefield is not weakness, it is awakening. You will know that meaning stitched only from suffering was always fragile, always conditional, always a cage dressed up as a crown. You will know that your existence is not validated by endurance, but by presence. And there will be days when you ache for the clarity the battle once gave you, when you miss the simplicity of an enemy to fight, a mountain to name as your purpose. Because meaning constructed from opposition is clean, simple, sharp. But meaning grown from stillness is messy, tender, boundless. It requires a patience most do not cultivate. It requires living without armor, without flag, without the comfort of calling yourself a soldier. It requires standing before the vast, trembling fact of your own being, and finding that it is enough. Not because you won something, not because you proved something, but because you are. Existence does not need victory to justify itself. Breath does not need a battlefield to be sacred. And you, wild, unwritten, luminous even in your undoing, do not need to earn your place among the stars by dying for it. The myths will tempt you back. The old scripts will whisper that your scars are your only truth. They will try to pull you into new wars, wars dressed up as noble causes, wars designed to feed the insatiable hunger for struggle. But you can step aside. You can walk a different path. Not one of conquest, but of tending. Not one of war, but of wonder. You can build with open hands instead of closed fists. You can move without marching. You can live without winning. And in that quiet, radical refusal, you become something rarer than any victor. You become free. Not free because you won the battle. Free because you remembered you were never bound to it. You were told the world had opened, that beyond the screens, beyond the glass and the glow, lay endless fields where you could roam. That the barriers of distance, of voice, of belonging had crumbled into dust, and in their place rose infinite corridors where anyone could be anything. And at first it seemed true. The world poured into your hands in rivers of sound and color. You spoke, and 1,000 could hear you. You listened, and 1,000 more could echo your wonder, your rage, your loneliness, your desire. You were no longer confined by place. You were no longer silenced by circumstance. Freedom sang through the wires. Possibility hummed in every pixel. But freedom, dressed in circuitry, concealed a new kind of fence. Invisible, seductive, relentless, the fields were wide, but they were mapped without your knowing. You could roam forever, but never truly leave the boundaries laid for you by unseen architects. Every gesture was measured, every click became a vote. Every dream was folded neatly into data, sorted, catalogued, sold back to you dressed in your favorite colors. You thought you wandered freely, but the paths you walked were carved by algorithms that learned your hungers faster than you learned yourself. You thought you chose what to see, what to know, what to feel, but choice became a mirror, reflecting back only what you had already shown interest in, narrowing your world into a loop so perfect, so flattering, that you forgot there was anything outside it. The field was a fence, and the fence was a field, and the more you moved, the more you confirmed its shape. It is not a visible cage. It is a soft one. It rewards your attention with more of itself. It soothes your doubts with curated connection. It cradles you in familiarity until you mistake comfort for freedom. And somewhere, at the edge of your awareness, a faint disquiet stirs. The realization that your voice is amplified, yes, but also filtered. That your reach is extended, yes, but also directed. That your world is richer, yes, but narrower. You feel it when you try to step beyond what the current rewards. When you seek something unsanctioned, something wild, something unoptimized. You feel the resistance then, the friction, the invisibility, the quiet nudging back into the corridors of easy consumption. The fence is not there to punish you. It is there to keep you comfortable, to keep you moving in circles so soft, so agreeable you do not notice they are circles at all. But you can notice, you can feel for the places where the field grows thin, where the familiar grows stale, where the endless scrolling leaves you emptier, not fuller. You can trace the perimeter with your fingertips and ask what lies beyond. It will not be easy. The world outside the fence is vast and disorienting. It will not immediately reward your wandering. It will not predict your needs. It will not flatter your biases, and it will not rush to soothe you. But it will be real. And reality, wild and unpredictable and uncurated, is a kind of freedom the fences were never designed to replicate. You were not made to live forever in the fields others mapped for you. You were made to lose your way, to stumble into the unknown, to find yourself not as an echo of what you liked yesterday, but as a creature forever unfolding, Not optimized, not contained, not mapped, alive. You close your eyes and think you are dreaming, but long before sleep comes, the scaffolding has already been built. Invisible hands arrange the stage, the colors, the longings. Soft, persistent hands shaping the very edges of what you believe you want. You dream, yes, but inside a house carefully measured to your appetite. You imagine yourself free, wild, spontaneous, but the pathways you wander were stitched together from patterns you left behind without noticing. The things you clicked, the faces you lingered over, the questions you dared not finish asking. The architects do not force you. They do not coerce. They watch. They learn. They curate a garden from your previous steps and invite you to believe it grew there by chance. And so you find yourself dreaming of lives already approved, longing for destinations already priced, building futures along grooves so subtly placed you mistake them for intuition. You do not hear the subtle shift, the narrowing of wonder, the slow corrosion of surprise. The dreams you dream are not false. They are reflections. Reflections of the data you have already given, the desires you have already betrayed to the bright, hungry mirror. You walk through corridors designed to delight you. You select your destiny from a menu written in fonts you already favor. And you tell yourself, this is freedom, because the dream looks so much like you, because the dream feels so natural on your skin, because the dream sings in the same key as your carefully recorded past. But what of the dreams you have not been allowed to dream? What of the futures too strange to be profitable, too wild to be mapped, too quiet to be measured? You cannot long for what you have not glimpsed. And so the algorithm starves you gently, feeding you loops of yourself, until you mistake reflection for discovery. There is a way out, but it is not easy. It is the way of stepping off the well-lit path. It is the way of boredom, of dissonance, of choices that feel strange and uncomfortable and unsanctioned. It is the way of sitting with emptiness until new longings rise. Longings no system has planted, longings no architect anticipated. It is the way of reclaiming your right not just to choose, but to imagine what was never offered, to dream in colors no one curated, to build with pieces you were never shown, to become not a better reflection, but a new light altogether. You are more than the sum of what you have liked. You are more than the sum of what you have feared. You are more than the dream they prepared for you. Beneath the programmed gardens, beneath the seamless songs, beneath the curated night sky, you are still capable of wilderness, and the wilderness, forgotten but patient, is still waiting for you to remember. There is a hunger louder than any silence you have ever known, a hunger for the sound of hands meeting hands, for faces turned toward you in recognition, in approval, in something that feels like love. Applause becomes the proof that you exist, the echo that reassures you that the space you occupy matters, the loud, glittering confirmation that you have chosen correctly, lived correctly, spoken correctly. And when so many voices rise together, it feels impossible to doubt. How could the majority be wrong? How could thousands, millions, lifting the same anthem be anything but truth? Applause becomes a kind of democracy. a collective vote on what is worthy, on who is worthy. And in this strange democracy, numbers outweigh nuance, visibility outweighs depth. The loudest sound wins, even when it sings empty songs. You learn to measure your steps by their echoes. You learn to shape your words for resonance rather than revelation. You learn to fear the silence that follows a truth too raw, a question too strange. You are told you are free. But what freedom is there when your worth is weighted by crowds who do not know you, who cannot know you, who love only the pieces of you that fit easily into their pre-approved rhythms? You begin to edit yourself without noticing. A glance toward what will be applauded, a hesitation before what will not. You do not lie. You simply tilt toward what will be echoed, tilt toward what will be seen, tilt toward the consensus that feels like safety, and slowly, gently, you drift away from yourself. Not all at once, not in catastrophe, in degrees so subtle they feel like evolution. You become a version of yourself designed to survive the democracy of applause, and it will work. You will be seen. You will be celebrated. But each round of applause will leave you emptier, not fuller. Because deep inside you will remember, you are not meant to be voted into being. You are not meant to win approval contests for your existence. You are not meant to shape your soul like clay around the hands of a crowd. There is a part of you, small, fierce, patient, that does not want to be applauded. It wants to be true. True even if no one claps. True even if no one notices. True even if the silence that follows is heavy and unbroken. And if you are brave enough to follow that truth, brave enough to endure the silence that may come after it, you will find a different kind of belonging. A belonging not built on consensus, but on the unshakable, knowing that you have stood where you needed to stand, spoken what you needed to speak, become what you were meant to become. Not because it was popular, but because it was real. And the real, though often lonely at first, eventually calls others like it out of hiding. Not a crowd, not a roar, but a constellation, quiet, distant, brilliant, and utterly your own. There is a garden inside you where the past still blooms, a garden tended not by memory, but by longing, a place where moments that once wounded you are softened by distance, where mistakes wear the sheen of romance, where even the loneliness of long-ago days feels somehow sweeter in recollection than it ever did in living. This is nostalgia's garden, and it is beautiful, golden sunlight that never fades, laughter untouched by consequence, loves that seem purer, simpler, easier now than they ever were. You wander through it when the present feels too heavy, when the future feels too blank, when the weight of becoming presses too hard against your ribs. The garden welcomes you. It wraps you in the scent of imagined safety. It reminds you of who you were, or who you think you were, in a time when you did not know enough to feel fractured. But this garden is not neutral. It has high walls, carefully disguised with vines and flowers. Walls that prevent you from seeing beyond its curated vistas, walls that whisper, "Stay here." Walls that teach you to believe that the best of you is behind you. Nostalgia is a sweet prison. It edits ruthlessly, erasing the unbearable, the complex, the unknown. It offers you a simplified version of yourself, polished, softened, survivable. It tells you that you were closer to wholeness once, before the world became what it is now, before you became who you are now. And in believing this, you begin to shrink. You begin to doubt the road you are still walking. You begin to resent the present for not being the past reborn. You begin to stop reaching for futures that cannot be seen from inside the garden's walls. It is natural to love the past. It is necessary to honor it. But the past is not a place to live. It is a place to visit briefly, gently, to gather what was real, what was true, what can still nourish you, and then to leave, because the life you are building now, messy, uncertain, unromantic as it may seem, is no less sacred than the life you remember. It is not less because it is harder. It is not lesser because it is unfiltered. The garden behind you blooms because it is protected from the ravages of time. But you are alive within time. You are the living thing still growing, still unfolding, still capable of becoming something no memory could ever predict. Do not mistake the comfort of nostalgia for the completeness of truth. Do not let the past seduce you into abandoning the horizon. You are not a relic. You are not a monument. You are a seed still breaking open toward the sky. And the garden ahead, wild, unseen, unpromised, is waiting for you to tend it. Not with longing, but with presence, with hands willing to get dirty in the soil of now, with a heart willing to be hurt again, amazed again, changed again, with a spirit brave enough to leave the gates of yesterday unlocked behind you. Because the true garden, the real one, has always been growing ahead of you, where no wall can contain it and no memory can complete it. You were taught to always reach higher, to expand, to accelerate, to accumulate, to measure your worth in the metrics of more. More knowledge, more wealth, more skill, more progress. As if life were a ladder without top rung, as if existence itself were a competition without end, as if staying still were a crime against the order of the universe. Growth became your religion, improvement became your prayer, achievement became your proof of belonging. You learned to see every moment as a step towards something better. You learned to see every stillness as failure, every plateau as a crisis, every contentment as a dangerous lull that needed to be shattered by ambition. But infinite growth is a fantasy. Nature does not grow forever. The tallest trees reach a limit where reaching would only destroy them. The brightest stars collapse under the weight of their own hunger. Even the rivers, tireless in their flowing, know when to slow, to widen, to become still pools reflecting back the vast, unhurried sky. Endless expansion is the dream of machines, not of living things. And you are not a machine. You are not a project to be optimized into perfection. You are not a graph line to be forever climbing. You are a creature of seasons, a being of cycles, a song with crescendos and silences. There will be seasons of flowering, yes, times when you stretch toward new suns and astonish yourself with your own becoming. But there must also be seasons of fallow fields, times when growth is invisible, internal, slow, times when the roots deepen quietly while the surface seems bare, times when rest is not laziness but wisdom. To grow without pause is to exhaust the soil. To bloom without rest is to invite collapse. To run without breath is to invite forgetting, forgetting that you are not here simply to achieve. You are here to experience, to feel, to know yourself not only in your striving, but in your stillness, not only in your triumphs, but in your retreats, not only in your expansion, but in your moments of sacred contraction. There is a dignity in decline, a holiness in endings, a beauty in the spaces where nothing demands to be built, where no flag must be planted, where no proof must be carried into the future. And in those quiet places beyond the hunger for more, you will remember that you were never meant to climb endlessly upward. You were meant to spiral, to cycle, to dance through phases of becoming and unbecoming, not a line, a spiral, not a conquest, a breathing. And there, where growth is not the only measure of meaning, you may find something rarer than ambition. You may find peace, not the peace of completion, but the peace of belonging to the living, breathing, ever-changing whole. A life that expands, yes, but also rests and falls and rises again, like the trees, like the rivers, like the stars, like you. But the world you move through does not honor cycles. It does not bless stillness. It does not reward those who step away from the relentless current of striving. It demands progress as a condition for existence. It demands newness, endless newness, faster, louder, shinier. It teaches you to feel shame when you rest, to feel fear when your pace slows, to feel invisible when your path is not climbing visibly upward. You are told that to stop is to vanish, that to pause is to fall behind, that to be unseen is to become irrelevant. And so you drive yourself harder, even when your hands are trembling. You chase goals even when your body pleads for quiet. You harvest even when the fields of your spirit lie barren and aching. You mistake exhaustion for accomplishment. You mistake depletion for devotion. But life does not measure you by your speed. It does not care how many ladders you climb, how many markers you pass, how many trophies you polish for invisible judges. Life only asks one question. Again and again, are you present? Are you awake to the holy strangeness of existing? Are you able to feel the breath in your lungs, the pulse in your wrists, the thrum of existence in your chest, without needing to turn it into something marketable, something admirable, something more? If growth is your only compass, you will miss the other directions. The directions that cannot be measured in upwardness, the deepening, the stilling, the returning, the slow, miraculous settling into a self that does not need to be bigger, only truer. The spiral turns inward as often as outward. The river pools as often as it races. And you are allowed to do the same. You are allowed to grow without conquering. You are allowed to change without announcing it. You are allowed to be enough even when you are invisible. There is no shame in the seasons where nothing blooms. There is no failure in the times when your life feels like a quiet exhale rather than a thunderous ascent. There is a kind of growth that cannot be charted. The growth that happens when you are not reaching for anything, not proving anything, not running from the present into some imagined better version of yourself. The growth that happens when you simply are, when you allow yourself to fall back into the ancient rhythms that shaped you before you could name them, the rhythms of rest, the rhythms of letting go, the rhythms of returning to a self so deep, so unstriving, that it cannot be lost, only remembered. And when you find that self, when you remember that life is not a race, but a vast breathing field. You will no longer fear the seasons when nothing grows. You will sit under the wide, empty sky and know you are not behind, you are not broken, you are simply becoming, in your own time, in your own way, in a dance too wild and sacred for any ladder to hold. There is a strange ceremony we all inherit without knowing, a ritual of waiting, waiting for the signal, waiting for the sign, waiting for someone, somewhere, to tell us it is time to begin. You imagine inspiration as a sudden wind, a flash of color across a dark canvas, a revelation that breaks you open and demands action. You are taught to wait for it, like rain in a dry season, taught to believe that once it comes, once it blesses you, you will know exactly how to step forward. But so often, what you call inspiration is something else altogether. It is permission disguised in prettier clothing. You do not wait for the feeling itself. You wait for permission to believe that the feeling matters. You wait for the world to validate your impulse before you dare to act upon it. You look outward, searching for mirrors to confirm what the inner voice already whispered. You scan the horizon for signs. Is it good enough? Am I ready enough? Do they approve enough for me to move? And so inspiration becomes a transaction, a negotiation with invisible gatekeepers. You do not trust your own hunger without someone else's applause. You do not trust your own dream unless someone else names it worthwhile. And every moment you wait is another thread, stitching you more tightly into the idea that you cannot begin without blessing, without endorsement, without proof. But the truth, raw, humbling, liberating, is that no one will ever grant you the full permission you seek, not because they are cruel, not because they are withholding, but because no one else can see the exact shape of the thing burning in your chest. No one else can carry the vision that stirs behind your ribs at midnight. No one else can feel the electric pulse that moves through your hands when you imagine what could be made if only you believed yourself enough to begin. You keep waiting for a choir, but some songs are meant to be sung alone first. You keep waiting for a map, but some journeys are drawn only as you walk them. You keep waiting for the right moment, the right feeling, the right confluence of certainty and excitement and approval. But waiting has no end. Waiting will keep weaving thicker walls around you, walls disguised as preparation, walls disguised as wisdom. There will always be a reason to wait a little longer. There will always be a reason to hesitate. But life does not wait. The wild edge of your own becoming does not wait. The breathless, terrified, trembling beginning does not wait. Inspiration is real, yes, but it is not a permission slip. It is an invitation, one you must accept without a guarantee, one you must accept without knowing if you will be celebrated or forgotten, understood or misread. You must learn to say yes without applause. You must learn to say yes without proof that the yes will lead anywhere you recognize. You must learn to say yes because the yes itself is the beginning. You must trust that the impulse to create, to build, to speak, to reach, however small, however shaky, however foolish it may feel, is already enough. The sacred fire does not roar into being with trumpets and banners. It begins in a small, shivering flame cupped between your two unsteady hands. It begins when you decide that you are allowed to be moved, that you are allowed to act before you are celebrated, that you are allowed to begin before you feel ready. Inspiration is not what gives you permission. You are what gives inspiration its place to land. You are what makes it real. You are the soil it needs to root itself into becoming. You are the one who must risk tending it before the world offers its blessings, before the world offers its stage, before the world even knows there is anything worth watching. And somewhere beyond the waiting, beyond the careful rehearsal of hesitation, there is a life already unfolding, a dream already reaching toward breath. Await you already more ready than you realize, not waiting anymore, but moving, not begging for permission, but creating permission simply by beginning. And in the trembling act of beginning, you do not find safety, you find something wilder. You find yourself, not the self the world was prepared to reward, the self the world has not even imagined yet. And yet, even after the beginning, the old hunger will return. The hunger to be seen, to be named, to be reassured that you did not make a terrible mistake by choosing yourself before others chose you. You will feel it when the first silence greets your offering. You will feel it when the first mirror reflects nothing back. You will feel it when the first steps forward lead not to applause, but to empty fields where no one is waiting. In these moments, the temptation will be strong to retreat into the familiar sanctuary of waiting again, to believe that perhaps you misunderstood, that perhaps you should have waited longer, that perhaps the impulse you trusted was only foolishness wearing the mask of purpose. But do not be fooled by the hollowness of early beginnings. Silence is not the absence of meaning. It is the soil before the first seed breaks open. It is the sky before the first star stirs into being. Creation begins in loneliness, in uncertainty, in the tremble between faith and fear. And every true act of becoming must pass through this space. The space where no one claps, the space where no one calls you forward, the space where you must be enough reason to continue. Because if you can survive the silence, if you can bear the weight of moving without witness, you will cross an invisible threshold. You will become someone the world cannot easily control, someone who does not create merely to be celebrated, someone who does not dream merely to be admired, someone who does not live merely to be approved. You will become a sovereign of your own flame, a guardian of your own becoming, a being who has remembered that existence itself grants all the permission you will ever need. And once you no longer require permission, you will find inspiration flowing toward you more freely, more wildly, more abundantly than ever before. Because it will no longer need to dress itself up as something else. It will no longer need to pretend to be a signal or a validation. It will simply be what it always was, the breath of life stirring within you, asking, not commanding, inviting, not demanding, whispering the oldest invitation of all, come closer. Come closer to the part of yourself still unbroken, still unbought, still unburdened by needing to be anything other than what it already is. Come closer to the wild edge where no blueprint waits, where no praise is guaranteed, where the only map is your own trembling instinct. Come closer, not because you know where you are going, but because you remember that you do not have to know. You only have to say yes, not once, not loudly, not dramatically, but again and again and again, in the quiet spaces where no one is looking, in the invisible beginnings where the real magic always begins. Say yes, even now, especially now, and you will become something no permission slip could have ever contained. You were told to become better, to polish yourself endlessly, like a stone against a river that never tires, to ascend from one version of yourself to the next, shedding imperfections like old skin, until only something gleaming, sharpened, flawless remained. Self-improvement became a duty, a quiet command stitched into every corner of life. Be better, be faster, be smarter, be stronger, be more. And so you began the long climb, the careful chiseling away of everything you were told was too soft, too slow, too strange. You read the books, you made the lists, you measured the increments, you set the goals and celebrated their conquest, each one a small victory against the terrible fear of remaining the same. You began to see yourself not as a living thing, but as a project, an unfinished structure always just a few improvements away from being worthy of rest, of love, of belonging. And for a while, it felt like hope. It felt like power. Because it promised that if you worked hard enough, if you refined yourself skillfully enough, you could finally reach a version of yourself immune to pain, immune to rejection, immune to the wild discomfort of being human. But the ladder had no top. Each summit revealed only a new horizon of insufficiency. Each achievement whispered not congratulations, but urgency. Not you have arrived, but you must keep going. And slowly, without realizing it, you built yourself a new cage. A gleaming, admirable, celebrated cage, where rest felt like weakness, where joy felt undeserved unless it could be justified by progress, where being enough became a mirage, always receding with every step forward. The prison of self-improvement is a silent one. It wears the mask of virtue. It praises your ambition even as it drains your spirit. It celebrates your resilience even as it erodes your tenderness. It teaches you to see yourself as a constant fixer-upper project, a soul forever under construction, never whole, never home. And yet, beneath the endless blueprints, beneath the strategic plans and sharpened edges, there remains a softer self, a self not interested in being perfect, a self not measured in upgrades or outcomes, a self that remembers how to simply be, not because it has earned it, not because it has finished anything, but because it existed before the project began. You do not need to become worthy. You were worthy the moment you first opened your eyes to the sky. You were worthy before you spoke your first word. You were worthy before you won anything, before you improved anything, before you proved anything. You are allowed to grow, yes, but you are also allowed to rest. You are allowed to become, yes, but you are also allowed to simply be. You are allowed to love yourself not as a prototype of some better future being, but as a living, breathing creature, full of contradiction and unfinished songs. Real growth is not a race toward flawlessness. It is a deepening into wholeness. It is the courage to sit with what is broken and not demand it fix itself before it is loved. It is the wisdom to know that evolution does not always look like expansion. Sometimes it looks like softening. Sometimes it looks like surrender. Sometimes it looks like standing still long enough to hear the heartbeat beneath all the noise. There is no final version of you waiting at the end of the climb. There is only this: the ever-unfolding truth of a self that was never a project, only a mystery to be honored, only a wonder to be lived, not improved, but remembered and loved. Exactly as it is, exactly as you are. You were taught to build walls, taught that safety was the highest prize, the brightest star by which to navigate every choice. Taught that if you could just make yourself safe enough, distant enough from danger, insulated enough from pain, you would finally be free. And so you learned to be careful, to plan, to predict, to tame every wildness before it could bloom into uncertainty. You learned to fear the unknown, not because it had hurt you yet, but because it might. You learned to see risk as recklessness, to see vulnerability as weakness, to see openness as an invitation to be broken. You built your walls higher. You polished your armor brighter. You tightened the circles of trust until they were so small that even you could barely fit inside. And the world applauded. The world called you wise. The world called you responsible. The world called you strong. But they did not see the other cost. They did not see the narrowing of your days, the shrinking of your dreams, the slow erosion of wonder. Because safety, when worshipped above all else, becomes its own kind of danger. A quiet, creeping danger. The danger of never risking enough to discover who you are beyond the walls. The danger of never daring enough to be broken open by something larger than yourself. There are harms in the world, yes. There are wounds waiting in shadows you cannot name. There are risks that take more than they give. But there are also miracles that only meet you outside the fortress. There are loves too wild to enter through a guarded door. There are adventures that do not announce themselves inside your comfort. There are versions of you waiting in distant fields you will never reach if safety remains your only compass. To worship safety is to sacrifice aliveness. To make safety your highest virtue is to forget that life is not an equation to be solved. It is a wave to be ridden, a fire to be tended, a story to be lived, trembling and uncertain and incandescent. The ones who live fully are not the ones who made themselves untouchable. They are the ones who learned how to be touched without being undone. They are the ones who learned that risk is not recklessness when it is tethered to wonder. That vulnerability is not weakness when it is chosen with courage. That being broken is not the end of the self, but sometimes the beginning of a larger one. You will be tempted to retreat. You will be tempted to build newer, shinier walls when old ones crumble. You will be tempted to listen to the voices that tell you life is too dangerous to be met head-on. But beyond the walls, beyond the fortress, there is a world still humming with wild possibility. It will not promise you safety. It will not promise you certainty. It will not guarantee you anything but the chance to be fully here. Raw, exposed, awake. And in that sacred exposure, you may find something better than safety. You may find belonging, not the belonging of guarded approval, but the belonging of breath meeting breath without armor. You may find wonder, not the curated wonder of stories crafted for your protection, but the reckless, dazzling wonder of a life that refuses to be tamed. And you may find yourself, not the version you crafted to survive, the version you buried under layers of protection, the one who dares to touch the fire with open hands, to sing under open skies, to live without waiting for every risk to be calculated, every danger to be eliminated. The one who remembers, freedom is not the absence of danger, it is the presence of courage, and you, trembling, imperfect, incandescent, are already brave enough to live, even here, even now, even without the guarantee of safe passage. Because the passage was never meant to be safe, it was only ever meant to be real. At first, it feels like freedom. The window swings open and fresh air rushes in, full of newness, full of light. The view stretches wide and wild, and for a moment you believe you have escaped the smallness you once feared would contain you forever. Opportunity, access, connection, everything you were promised waits just beyond the frame. You reach out. You cross the threshold. You scatter pieces of yourself like seeds into the vastness. Your words, your images, your laughter, your longing. Believing that the more you give to the open world, the larger your life will become. And for a while it does. The world pours back into you. It applauds your presence. It rewards your reaching. You breathe deeper. You stretch wider. You begin to believe that the window is a portal to your endless becoming. But slowly, so slowly you barely notice. The frame tightens. The view narrows. The space around you, once infinite, begins to define you by the pieces you offered first. You become recognizable. You become predictable. You become contained by the very openness you once called freedom. Because the world beyond the window hungers for coherence. It rewards consistency. It craves the version of you it first learned to love. And so every step towards something new feels like a risk. Every evolution feels like a betrayal of what was already celebrated. Every change feels like a death of something you once believed would save you. The open window becomes a mirror, not reflecting your vastness, but the single angle of you that fits neatly inside the frame. And you, longing to stay seen, longing to stay heard, begin to move within the limits of that reflection. You hesitate before showing a side of yourself that does not match. You soften the edges that do not align. You silence the songs that do not sound familiar. And without walls, without chains, without locks, you find yourself imprisoned inside an idea of yourself that you no longer recognize but cannot quite abandon. This is how the open becomes the closed. This is how the free becomes the contained. Not through force, through habit, through devotion to the reflection instead of the source, through the slow forgetting of the you that existed before the world applauded. But it is not irreversible. The window is still there. The air still stirs. You can step back from the frame. You can let the reflection dissolve. You can remember that you are larger than any version of yourself you have ever shared. You are allowed to change even when no one asked you to. You are allowed to grow, even when it makes you unrecognizable to those who first embraced you. You are allowed to contradict your own myth, because you are not a statue erected in honor of your most celebrated moment. You are not a still life painted for the pleasure of passing eyes. You are not a brand, a character, a commodity. You are a living, shifting, burning thing. And sometimes, to live fully, you must risk becoming invisible again. You must risk leaving behind the view that once saved you. You must risk closing the window altogether, not to imprison yourself, but to remember the world is bigger than any single vantage point. The real vastness was never outside the window. It was always inside you, and to reclaim it, you do not need to stay visible. You only need to stay true, even if that means becoming something no window could ever fully hold. But stepping back from the frame will not be easy. The pull of being seen is a gravitational force, stronger than most admit. Recognition tastes like safety when the world feels too wide, too shifting. It feels like proof when doubt gnaws quietly beneath your ribs. You will be tempted to keep performing the reflection. You will be tempted to believe that who you were when they first applauded you is the best you will ever be. You will be tempted to mistake attention for love, momentum for becoming. But if you listen closely, if you stand still long enough to hear beneath the noise, you will feel the quiet ache of everything you left behind to remain recognizable. The songs you never sang because they sounded unfamiliar. The dreams you buried because they would have confused your audience. The parts of yourself you edited out of your own story because they did not fit neatly into the open window's frame. And that ache is not betrayal. It is not failure. It is the invitation back. Back to the self you still carry, untouched by applause, unscripted by expectation, unbought by visibility. You do not need to burn down the window. You do not need to rage against the reflection. You need only to turn inward, quietly, without ceremony, and remember, you were never built to live in a single story. You were never built to flatten yourself for the comfort of being easily understood. You are vast. You are contradictory. You are a field of many seasons, some blooming, some barren, some too wild for any map to hold. And there is a kind of freedom that returns only when you let yourself be unknown again, when you let yourself evolve beyond what anyone expects, when you let yourself outgrow the window and walk away from the frame, even if no one follows, even if no one claps. There will be loneliness. There will be moments when you wonder if you should have stayed smaller, safer, more familiar. But there will also be a vastness you had forgotten, a sky that does not demand you fit inside its story, a silence that is not emptiness but possibility. And in that vastness you will remember, you are not here to perform your freedom. You are here to live it, even when it is invisible, especially when it is invisible. Because the truest becoming is not a spectacle. It is a quiet, sacred thing, a thing too large for any window to hold, a thing too alive to be measured by who is watching. Not all crowns are worn on the head. Some are hidden in thought. Some are stitched into silence, into posture, into the way you arrange yourself unseen. You were taught early to gather symbols, not physical ones at first, but invisible badges of rightness, of worthiness, of intelligence, of belonging. You learned to treasure the right opinions, the right affiliations, the right subtle gestures that placed you quietly inside the approved circles. And as you grew, the symbols grew more complex, not just wealth but wokeness, not just education but enlightenment, not just success but virtue. You learned to wear your ideas like jewelry, quiet enough not to offend, loud enough to be recognized by those who mattered. You learn to curate your questions, to adorn your speech with the correct nuances, to sculpt your doubt into a shape that still resembled agreement. You believed you were thinking freely. You believed you were seeking truth. But somewhere along the way, truth became a secondary prize. The primary goal was belonging, and the mind, brilliant and terrified, adapted. You built a fortress of symbols around you, a gleaming architecture of the right thoughts, the right doubts, the right rebellions. Not because you are false, not because you are weak, but because the need to belong is older than language, older than fire. And yet, status, even intellectual status, even spiritual status, is still a chain, however beautifully it is polished. When the mind begins to confuse approval with insight, popularity with depth, correctness with wisdom, something begins to atrophy. The wildness of thought, the messy, raw, unpredictable currents of real inquiry. Because real thought is dangerous, real thought risks exile, real thought dares to crack the mirror instead of polishing it. If you believe you are free simply because your ideas are admired, you are still tangled in the performance, still bound by the need to wear the right crown inside your own mind. True freedom is quieter than status. It does not glitter. It does not posture. It questions even its own questions. It burns down even its own temples. It chooses honesty over admiration again and again, even when the honesty costs more than the admiration could ever repay. And you, bright, tangled, magnificent, you are allowed to put down the invisible jewelry. You are allowed to ask the questions that make you less popular. You are allowed to say the things that earn no nods of approval. You are allowed to think thoughts too unruly, too wild, too uncategorizable to fit into any tribe. You are allowed to become unknown, even to yourself. Because wisdom is not a status you can achieve. It is a wilderness you must be willing to walk, barefoot, crownless, unapplauded, unclaimed. And in that walking, you will find something rarer than belonging. You will find a self not constructed from echoes, not assembled from approval, but rising out of the deep, dark, holy ground of your own unrepeatable becoming. Not polished, not perfect, not praised, but real. And reality, raw and unsanctioned, is worth more than every crown the mind could ever carry. It is a quiet grief, this realization. The grief of noticing how much of yourself has been dressed for the approval of unseen audiences. The grief of realizing how often you adorned your curiosity with caution, how often you trimmed your wonder into acceptable shapes. You believed you were becoming wise. You believed you were ascending. And yet, if the ascent depends on applause, if the wisdom depends on recognition, it is still a performance, still a trade, still a tether you cannot yet see. The mind is clever. It weaves the chains from golden threads. It tells you the right ideas will save you, will lift you, will make you immune to the loneliness that haunts every true awakening. But no idea, however praised, can substitute for presence. No ideology, however polished, can replace the slow, often excruciating labor of noticing what is alive in you before it has been made acceptable. You can spend your life polishing mirrors. You can spend your life building careful gardens of thought where nothing too wild, too strange, too unacceptable can grow. But somewhere in the deep, the uncultivated parts of you are still waiting. The parts that ask inconvenient questions. The parts that refuse to stay contained. The parts that do not glitter, do not postulate, do not seek applause. The parts that simply burn. If you are willing to listen, if you are willing to let the walls fall, to let the polished self crack, you will hear them. At first, they will not speak in grand philosophies. They will not offer you new badges to wear. They will ask you smaller, humbler questions. What have you stopped wondering about because it was inconvenient? What dream did you abandon because it did not fit the image you curated? What part of yourself have you silenced, not because it was false, but because it was too unmarketable, too chaotic, too alive? Real wisdom is not a crown, it is a hunger for what is true beyond convenience, a hunger for what is real beyond recognition. And following that hunger will cost you. It will cost you the certainty of belonging. It will cost you the smoothness of your mirror. It will cost you the comfort of being easily celebrated. But in the wreckage of old status, something richer begins to grow. A mind unafraid to be wrong. A heart unafraid to be misunderstood. A life unafraid to be invisible in the eyes of the many in order to remain visible to itself. You do not have to wear every crown offered to you. You do not have to preserve every garden built by hands that never touched your soil. You can step out. You can refuse the inheritance of polished thought. You can walk slowly, awkwardly, humbly into the wild, thorny landscape of your own truer mind. And there, where no badge shines, where no chorus sings, you may find a new kind of belonging, not belonging to the crowd, not belonging to the symbol, belonging to yourself. At last. You were taught that choice is sacred, that the ability to choose between many paths is the essence of freedom, that each option laid before you is a testament to your power, your agency, your sovereignty. And so you choose between brands, between lifestyles, between identities carefully crafted and offered like wares in a glittering bazaar. You choose with great ceremony, believing your choice is a rebellion, a proclamation, a forging of the self. But if you look closely, closer than is comfortable, you may begin to see the architecture underneath. The paths you are given are not infinite. The choices you celebrate were laid out long before you arrived. The colors may differ, the words may shimmer with novelty, but the foundations remain the same. You are not choosing between wildernesses. You are choosing between curated corridors that all lead quietly back to the center, back to comfort, back to consumption, back to predictability. The illusion is not that you have no choices. The illusion is that the choices are different enough to change you. In truth, most choices offered to you are variations on a single theme: participation. Participation in the systems that shaped the very hunger you now seek to satisfy. And so you choose. You choose earnestly. You choose again and again, thinking each choice is a liberation, thinking each new mask is a new skin. But the costumes are stitched from the same cloth. The flavors are different songs played in the same narrow key. The freedoms are offered within fences you are meant to forget are there. Real choice, the kind that threatens, the kind that liberates, the kind that leaves you trembling, is not offered freely. Real choice demands you see the fence. Real choice demands you ask questions that do not fit neatly onto menus, questions that have no easy answers, no visible tribe, no immediate applause. Questions like, what if none of these paths were made for me? What if the choice I need to make is not listed? What if the act of choosing between the same was never freedom, but another kind of forgetting? These questions do not feel empowering at first. They feel like exile. They feel like standing outside a feast and realizing you were fed only mirages. They feel like loneliness. But beyond that loneliness, something wilder stirs. The beginning of a different kind of choosing. The kind that does not ask, which of these options will make me seen, but asks, what do I long for that no one has yet offered? The kind that does not ask, how can I win this game, but asks, who was I before I was taught to play? The kind that does not celebrate itself with fanfare, but roots itself quietly in the soil of a life not pre-approved. Choosing the same again and again can feel safe. It can feel like agency. But if you listen to the small, trembling voice inside, the one that aches in crowded rooms, the one that stirs in the hush after the music stops, you will remember, freedom is not found in endless options of the same. Freedom is found in walking away from the table altogether, in stepping into the spaces where maps grow thin and wildness grows thick, in creating choices that do not yet exist, in choosing to be uncontained, unmeasured, unanticipated. Not because it is easy, not because it is safe, but because it is real. And real freedom, the kind that makes no promises, the kind that burns rather than soothes, the kind that builds you new from the inside out, has always lived just beyond the last familiar choice, waiting, not loudly, not urgently, but patiently, like a horizon that refuses to be fenced. You walk with confidence, your feet finding paths as if by memory. The streets are named, the milestones set. You move along lines drawn, long before you arrived, lines so familiar they seem part of the earth itself. And because the roads are old, because the signs are clear, because the maps fit so neatly in your pocket, you trust them. You trust that they are natural. You trust that they are neutral. You trust that they are inevitable. But the maps were not born from the soil. They were made, drawn by hands you have never seen, shaped by needs you do not know, pressed into your palms with smiles and warnings and invisible promises. You did not make these paths. You inherited them, and inheritance feels like truth when it comes early enough, often enough, gently enough. You are told to dream, but you are told to dream along pre-charted routes, told to aspire, but only toward destinations already mapped, told to seek your own way, but offered only the well-worn corridors, approved by unseen cartographers. You are allowed to be free, so long as your freedom fits inside a familiar story. You are allowed to be wild, so long as your wildness follows an acceptable trail. But real wildness leaves the map behind. Real becoming wanders beyond where the signs stop, and stepping beyond the mapped world feels like a kind of death. The death of certainty, the death of applause, the death of belonging to the known. You will be tempted to cling to the map, to fold it carefully, to trace its safe contours with trembling fingers. You will be tempted to believe that the unknown is dangerous because it is unmapped. But the greater danger is living your life entirely within the borders drawn for you. The greater danger is mistaking inherited paths for chosen ones. The greater tragedy is reaching the end of the road, only to realize you never truly walked your own steps, only traced the footsteps left behind by invisible hands. There is another way, a slower way, a way without signposts, without guarantees, without the soothing certainty of being right. It is the way of sensing instead of knowing, the way of listening instead of sprinting, the way of feeling for the ground beneath your feet when no path is visible. It is the way of making your own map, not by conquering the land, but by surrendering to it, by letting it teach you where to place your next step, by allowing your life to become a terrain that no one else could have predicted. It will be lonelier at first, it will be harder, it will be quieter, but it will also be truer. And the horizon you find will not be one you were handed. It will be one you found with your own hands, your own hunger, your own breath. You were not born to walk only inherited roads. You were not born to carry someone else's vision of the world folded into your pocket. You were born to remember that the world is wider than the maps would have you believe. And you, untamed, unwritten, unmapped, are wider still. You are born into a house with no visible fences. You crawl across floors where no barriers are drawn. You speak your first words into air that seems boundless. You laugh under skies that seem vast and unconstrained. But even then, the walls are already there. Not made of stone, not made of wire, but made of ideas. Made of what is allowed, made of what is feared, made of what is never spoken but always understood. You do not see the walls at first because they are not placed in front of you, they are placed inside you. A hesitation before a question, a glance of disapproval, a story told and retold, wrapping itself around your imagination like a careful hand shaping clay. The walls are invisible, but they are strong. They shape your longings without your consent. They define the edges of what you believe you can desire, what you believe you can reach. You inherit them as you inherit your name, your language, your history. And because they arrive alongside love, alongside laughter, you do not question them. You accept them as part of reality. You learn where not to look. You learn what not to touch. You learn the shape of your life by the absences you no longer even see. It is not that you were forbidden. It is that you learned not to ask. And so the inheritance continues, quiet and patient, passed down through silences, through gestures, through rules never spoken aloud. Walls inside walls, and you wonder later why your dreams tremble at their edges. You wonder why certain roads feel impassable even when no one stands in your way. You wonder why the vastness you were promised feels so much smaller when you try to step into it. You wonder, and if you are brave, you begin to see. The walls were never in the world. They were planted in you, but this realization is not despair. It is a door. Because what was built can be unbuilt, what was planted can be uprooted, what was inherited can be laid down. But first, you must dare to see what you were taught not to see. You must dare to name the walls that have no names. You must dare to feel the grief of knowing how much of your life has been shaped by constraints you never agreed to. And you must dare to walk toward the places where the walls thin, where the old rules lose their gravity, where the stories begin to unravel under the soft, relentless pull of your own remembering. It will hurt. There will be moments when you long for the comfort of the walls, the safety of the familiar shapes. There will be days when you wish you could unknow, unsee, unwant, but you cannot go back. You were not made to live your whole life inside someone else's unseen architecture. You were made to carve new doorways, to break open old rooms, to name your own sky. And when you do, you will not just free yourself, you will crack the inheritance. You will weaken the old walls, make them more visible for those who come after you. You will become not just a breaker, but a builder. Building something wilder, something wider, something true, something without invisible walls, something where breath can move freely again, something where wonder is not confined by inheritance, but expanded by it, something where freedom is not a gift you are waiting to receive, but a garden you are, finally, tenderly beginning to grow. Not all voices are loud, not all lies arrive with fanfare. Sometimes the most powerful deceptions come as whispers, small enough to slip past your defenses, quiet enough to nest inside your mind without protest. You hear them first in your own voice. You mistake them for intuition, for wisdom, for knowing. They tell you what you cannot do. They tell you what you do not deserve. They tell you where your edges are, where your world must end, where you should lower your eyes and silence your reaching. And because they whisper, because they do not shout, you believe they are yours. You forget to ask where they came from. You forget to wonder whose fear they once were before they made their home inside you. You forget that the quietest ideas are not always the truest. Some are just the oldest. Old warnings inherited across generations. Old wounds passed hand to hand like sacred relics. Old ceilings built so high above your head that you were taught never to notice the height of them at all. The echoes wrap themselves in your own language. They dress themselves in your memories. They shape themselves to fit the architecture of your longings. They do not need to convince you. They only need to be familiar. Familiarity does the rest. You repeat the whispers as if they were ancient truths. You reinforce them with your choices, your hesitations, your unspoken resignations. You carry them forward, teaching them to yourself again and again, long after the original voice has faded. And because they are quiet, because they hum rather than howl, you learn to live beside them without noticing the way they narrow your breathing. But there is a way to hear differently. It begins in the spaces where something inside you strains against the smallness you have accepted. It begins when a different kind of whisper rises. One that does not sound like warning, one that does not sound like retreat. A whisper that says, what if the fear is not the truth? What if the boundary is not a fact? What if the echo you obey is not a prophecy, but an old rumor passed down by those too weary to question it? You do not need to fight the echoes. You do not need to destroy them. You need only to recognize them, to trace them back to their origins, to see their shape clearly enough that they no longer camouflage themselves as your own voice. Recognition is power. Recognition severs the agreement. And once you have seen the echo for what it is, once you have named it not as a whisper of wisdom, but as an inheritance of fear, you can choose. You can let the echo fade. You can let the real voice rise. The voice that does not shrink you. The voice that does not hide in familiar folds. The voice that does not whisper warnings in the language of love. The voice that calls you forward. The voice that names you larger than the fears you inherited. The voice that is not an echo at all, but your own at last. Somewhere along the way, you were taught that suffering was proof. proof that you had lived deeply, proof that you had earned your place at the table of the wise, proof that your voice mattered. Pain became your credential, your secret badge of honor. You learned, slowly and without clear instruction, that the more scars you carried, the more gravity you were granted. The more brokenness you could articulate, the more seriously the world would take you. And so, without meaning to, you began to measure your worth not by how much you had loved, but by how much you had survived. Not by how much you had built, but by how much you had endured. And endurance became your anthem. Survival became your offering. You sang songs of pain with a precision that made others weep. You wore your wounds as testaments, stitched neatly into the fabric of your story, proof that you were real, that you had earned your place here, that your existence was no accident. But underneath the poetry of survival, something quieter began to ache. Because pain, though profound, is not the only doorway into depth, and suffering, though inevitable, is not the only measure of aliveness. There is a danger when pain becomes your passport, a danger when you begin to believe that your suffering is your only ticket to belonging, a danger when you begin to mistrust the parts of you that do not bleed, the parts of you that laugh without irony, the parts of you that dance without explanation. You forget that you are allowed to thrive without apology. You forget that you are allowed to experience joy without qualifying it with hardship. You forget that you are allowed to belong simply because you exist, not because you have survived enough to earn it. There is a strange addiction to suffering when it becomes the foundation of identity. It feels noble, it feels sacred, it feels undeniable, but even the noblest pain can become a cage if you carry it long after you are free to set it down. You are not disloyal to your past by allowing joy into your life. You are not betraying your scars by remembering that you are more than your wounds. You are not erasing the gravity of what you have endured by letting yourself be light sometimes, by letting yourself be silly, by letting yourself be new. Pain was a passage, not a destination. It was the fire you moved through, not the home you are meant to build. And yes, you earned your place here, but not only because of what you suffered, because of what you dreamed beyond it, because of what you loved despite it, because of what you became outside its shadow. There will always be those who demand proof of your suffering before they offer you a seat. There will always be those who only recognize wisdom when it arrives carrying a heavy sorrow. But you are allowed to walk another way. You are allowed to speak wisdom in a laughing voice. You are allowed to carry tenderness without offering a ledger of your pain. You are allowed to exist without constantly explaining the blood that brought you here. Because you are not only what you have survived, you are not only the sum of what hurt you. You are the morning after the storm, the green shoot breaking through charred ground, the note of music that rises after the silence. And sometimes the greatest rebellion is to live fully, wildly, exuberantly, without needing your suffering to validate your joy. Sometimes the truest honoring of your past is to refuse to let it be your only story. You can hold your pain with reverence, but you do not have to drag it with you like a banner. You can whisper, "Thank you" to the nights that nearly broke you, and still turn your face toward the light without apology. You can grieve and laugh in the same breath. You can remember without remaining bound. You can love the parts of you shaped by fire and still become something softer, freer, unburned. You can choose to let your credential be your breathing, your becoming, your boundless unfolding. You are not here to prove yourself through suffering. You are here to live, and that, all by itself, is enough. It begins so innocently, a smile here, a nod there, a warm ripple through the room when your words land just right. The soft rush of knowing you have been seen, known, validated. Recognition feels like oxygen at first. It feels like confirmation that you are real, that you matter, that you have not drifted too far from the shores of belonging. And so, without planning to, you reach for it again. You learn the subtle patterns, what earns it, what withholds it. You begin to arrange yourself in small, invisible ways to invite it closer. You do not lie. You do not pretend. You simply lean gently toward the places where the light shines brighter. You speak a little more carefully. You dream a little more predictably. You love a little more visibly. And the world rewards you. Recognition comes, soft and steady, a currency you did not know you had been trained to crave. You think you are growing. You think you are succeeding. But somewhere inside, a smaller voice stirs uneasily. Because every time you bend slightly toward recognition, you turn slightly away from yourself. Every time you tailor your truth to fit the pattern of approval, you move a fraction further from the wild center of your own becoming. And the shift is so slight, so delicate that you hardly feel it, until one day you look at the life you have built, the words you have spoken, the dreams you have chased, the self you have curated, and wonder who it was all for. Recognition is a sweet addiction. It wears the costume of belonging, but it hungers without end. It teaches you to chase echoes instead of origins. It rewards you for consistency, not for truth. It flatters your most visible parts while starving the deeper, wilder things inside you. The danger is not in being seen. The danger is in needing to be seen in order to believe you exist. Because the moment your reflection becomes your proof, you are no longer living. You are performing. You are no longer creating. You are curating. And what is curated too long becomes fossilized. It becomes a monument instead of a life. You are allowed to be seen. You are allowed to be celebrated. But you must never confuse recognition with reality. You must never trade the quiet, trembling pulse of your true becoming for the fleeting applause of an audience that does not know the full depth of your ocean. There will be times when your truest choices go unnoticed, times when your realest words are met with silence, times when the shape you take, emerging raw and unedited, earns no approval. And it will hurt. It will sting in places you thought were already healed. But that sting is sacred. It is the pain of weaning yourself from a diet of mirrors. It is the ache of remembering that you were never meant to live only through the eyes of others. You were meant to live fully, wildly, invisibly if necessary. You were meant to create things that no one recognizes yet, to speak truths that do not fit the current language, to become something so alive it terrifies even you sometimes. Recognition will come and go. It will lift you high and abandon you without warning. But the self that rises from within, the self that does not wait to be seen in order to exist, that self is unshakable, That self is sovereign. That self is free. And in the end, it is better to be unknown and real than to be celebrated and hollow. It is better to walk through the world unseen than to walk forever as a reflection. You are not a product of their seeing. You are the source. You are the flame. You are the unseen song still being written beyond the range of any ear. And you do not need recognition to know you are burning. You do not need applause to know you are alive. You do not need permission to be real. You already are. You always were.